Welcome, I am Sean, and this is finally episode 30 of BL4 Lore. If you have been following the series, then you know the fact that this episode even exists is something of a miracle. Fighting Ludwig has been by far the greatest challenge I've ever faced in the Souls games. It took me hundreds of attempts over 6 months, and I gave up multiple times, but in the end, I managed to tame this pony. In this episode, I'm going to talk all about the cool theories people have about the story of Ludwig, and about fighting this poor brute at BL4. Ludwig was the first hunter of the Healing Church, and was known for his silver sword. The silver sword actually became a symbol for the church hunters, known as the sword hunters. While other groups of hunters came before, the sword hunters were the first official hunters of the Healing Church. Many of the sword hunters of the Healing Church were clerics. Regularly imbibing the old blood, going out on hunts, it's not surprising that these clerics transformed into the most hideous of beasts. I imagine that Ludwig was viewed as something of a hero to the people. As the captain of the church hunters at the time, he was not only the face of the Healing Church sanctioned hunters, but as captain it would be his return to the cathedral ward that would signal the end of the hunt. Ludwig recruited Yarnamites to act as hunters alongside the sword hunters of the church. While this is speculation on my part, I think this served not only to bolster the ranks of the hunters, but was also a gesture of cooperation between the Healing Church and Yharnam on Ludwig's part, even if these recruits probably ended up as puppy chow. At some point during his service as a hunter of the Healing Church, Ludwig discovered two things: the Rune for Guidance and the Holy Moonlight Blade. In his video linked below, Mitch L. suggests that Ludwig may have found the Moonlight Greatsword and Guidance rune in the Chalice dungeons. This is an extrapolation made from the Radiant Sword badge granting access to the Prospector set in the Hunter's Dream. Also, Ludwig is described as discovering the sword, not crafting it, and the Old Labyrinth is a logical place to find such an arcane artifact. I believe that it was discovering the sword that led Ludwig to hearing the Guidance rune. The Holy Moonlight Blade item description states, "The Holy Moonlight Sword is synonymous with Ludwig, the Holy Blade, but few have ever set eyes on the Great Blade, and whatever guidance it has to offer, it seems to be of a very private, elusive sort." Ludwig seems to have been very private about the blade and what guidance it offered. So what guidance did he receive from this arcane sword that channels the abyssal cosmos? The Guidance rune says, when Ludwig closed his eyes, he saw darkness, or perhaps nothingness, and that is where he discovered the tiny beings of light. Ludwig was certain that these playful dancing sprites offered guidance. They could empty Ludwig of his fears, at least in the midst of a hunt. Who are these tiny beings of light? Is it the cosmos Ludwig saw, and the guidance he received, the inhuman mutterings of a great one? It's possible that this answer is not meant to be known, the secret tucked away with Ludwig and the, as of yet, undiscovered level 3 Guidance rune. Sinclair Lore created a video about the Guidance rune, in which she discovered some interesting connections between the Guidance rune and seahorses, a fish of the genus Hippocampus, which is both a part of the brain and a mythological half-horse, half-fish creature. It's a really interesting video that makes a connection I wouldn't have thought of, and I definitely recommend checking it out. Either way, we learn from the rune description that guidance from the sprites took away Ludwig's fears. In Aegon of Astor's Let's Talk Lore 16, with his guest Redgrave says that the guidance rune is making a direct reference to something Eileen the Crow says. Without fear in our heart, we're little different than the beasts ourselves. Ludwig fearlessly went against the beasts and became one himself. Now I'd like to talk about the boss fight against Ludwig, and I'll start with, before entering the room, I would equip fire paper and a beast blood pellet. And that's just to do more damage against him. And then once in the room, kind of like clockwork, do the jumping attack, which you can dodge through, and then just get an R1, L1. This would often move into the moves that were most punishable in Phase 1, and that was a slash attack, which is either a semicircular slash attack or a series of forward-moving slashes. And in both these cases, after he slashes, you're able to dodge in and score some big hits on his right or left side, which both can stagger. And once I did stagger on a side, I would do a series of, it would be an R1, and then I would do transform attacks until I was back to the normal weapon, and then a few quick R1s. I found this was the safest way to maximize damage without accidentally getting myself caught in another attack. In order to get these claw attacks, really the easiest way is just to keep the correct distance against Ludwig in Phase 1, and I tend to keep, I guess it would be a medium distance, not too up close to him, but not too far away, and this will help trigger the attacks you want to see, and keep away some of the other ones that aren't punishable, such as the charge attacks, or the stomping attack, or this other lunge attack, which in my experience, and for me at least, were harder to dodge reliably, and not easily punishable. And if you do back away, you also might see one of his two arcane neck squirt attacks, one of which goes in a spray, where he turns his head like a sprinkler, or one that's a longer range spray straight forward. In either case, I tended to use my judgment with how far away I was, but in most cases I would just use that opportunity to close in on him and reset my positioning. The last set of Phase 1 attacks I'm going to talk about, there's a jumping attack where he does not stay up in the air very long, and in that case, if I had the correct distance, I found that I could sort of dodge up and to the left and set myself up nicely to punish it once he landed, or if I was a bit farther away and I didn't immediately break lock on, then I would just back away. As far as the attack where he lingers on the ceiling for a moment, I would just simply run forward, and then I just got to know the timing and would do a quick dodge to the right when I knew he was going to be dropping down, and this wasn't 100% effective, but it was effective in most cases and tended to work for me. Now I'd like to talk about Phase 2, which I had a harder time with than Phase 1 eventually, but I think that's just because of the amount of time I got to play with it. But similar to Phase 1, Phase 2 is all about your positioning against Ludwig, but while in Phase 1 you could sort of comfortably keep a medium distance, in Phase 2 I found what worked for me was really hugging up against him on his right side, sort of around the back, right next to the tail. And I found this to be more sensitive, and I found myself more liable to be caught in some of his sword swings. But if you're in that right spot, you just seem to be able to bait his attacks in such a way that it's not a big deal. And while I broke down the attacks in Phase 1, in Phase 2, my real suggestion is, for the sword swings, just dodge when he swings his sword. Each time trying to maintain your position around the back, and to mostly attack with one or two attacks after he finishes his three cleaving attack. Seemed to be the most reliable to get an attack. And if you find yourself going around back, he will try to swipe you if you slide too far around towards his back left side, so that just requires a quick dodge that will bring you back around. And if you find yourself far away, he will use either his charging swipe, or he will use some of his arcane attacks, and that's just a matter of understanding those dodges. But especially the charging swipe for me, I found, could be difficult to dodge reliably depending on what position I was at, so I found that hugging him was a little bit safer. And once he gets into the attack where he lifts up his sword and has this big AoE effect, that was probably the most punishable attack, where you could easily get around back and then do damage. And although it may not be a great suggestion, I actually think it's pretty safe to, when he raises his sword, to get hit by that attack, because it does not kill you, and if you're close to him, it's easier to walk around him and then just rally the health back. Now this attack where he raises his sword is the exact opposite of the AoE attack where he plunges his sword into the ground, where I would certainly recommend backing away, as at BL4 that will one-shot you. The only real upside to the attack where he plunges his sword into the ground is it's a good time to heal, or maybe put on some fire paper depending. So it helps to reset things, but it's definitely a dangerous attack if you find yourself too close to him. And with that, let's take a look at the successful attempt against Ludwig. Apply the fire paper, and the beastblood pellet. Do not get snagged by the witch.
Please help us. An unsightly beast. A great terror loose. Ludwig the Accursed is coming. Have mercy. Have mercy upon us.
And as I mentioned, charge right in, dodge through that opening attack. You will initiate a swipe, dodge in. Staggered the left side, which actually sets me up nice on this next attack to dodge in and hit the right side. He does something a bit abnormal there where he does a arcane blast, but it got me through a quick phase 1.
You were at my side all along. My true mentor. My guiding moonlight.
And I have full beast meter, so I'm a little bit antsy to take advantage of that. So I'm a little risky, as you'll see in a moment. Got a few close dodges, and now this is where I'm really gambling with the beast blood pellet, trying to take advantage of that opportunity. But I would not recommend that because I easily could have died from that AoE attack if I hadn't done enough damage. Dodge the sword swings. There I get a little greedy and I get hit on a sword swing. But I once again panic and start hitting, and I am very lucky that I'm able to get the stagger, followed into the next stagger, and finally beat this bastard. Do a few victory laps for a little while. Can't help it. This was the culmination of hours and of attempts over the course of months. Of course, I'm going to approach calmly and get the lore, but of course that's not true, and I just chop him in the face. But we will talk what he would say if I wasn't quite so cleave happy. All right, and with that, let's talk about a bit about Ludwig's story from here on out, and get in a little bit of talk about design, and yeah. Ludwig has plenty of connections when it comes to the inspiration for his design. As mentioned earlier, inspiration for his design could be drawn from the hippocampus mythological creature. Richard Pilbeam notes in episode 81 of Bonfireside Chat, where he guesses that Horseface is one of the guardians of the underworld in Asian mythology. JSF also throws out that the massive arms and legs could also be a nod toward Lovecraft's Dunwich Horror. In World, it is interesting to note that many of the beasts are wolf-like. While this difference could simply be a way to connect to one of the previously mentioned external references, there is also a semi-common theory that perhaps Ludwig had a steed who he became fused with, which helps to explain the multiple awkwardly sprouting limbs. Mitch L. also offers up that perhaps he angered the Great Ones and was subsequently cursed, for either his role as a leader in the hunts or using the Moonlight blade. This would also add further meaning to his name, Ludwig the Accursed. With regards toward Ludwig's appearance, there is an interesting theory by Scrubstat on Reddit that proposes that Ludwig was a church giant. This is based upon Ludwig wearing the same garb as the church giants, and generally being really huge. He also goes into more detail about Ludwig and theories about church giants, so I recommend checking that out. It's linked in the description below. So now let's find out what Ludwig would have told us if I hadn't been quite as trigger happy with the saw cleaver. Speaking to him after the fight without church attire on, he asks,
Good hunter, have you seen the thread of light? Just a hair, a fleeting thing. Yet I clung to it, steeped as I was in the stench of blood and beasts. I never wanted to know what it really was. Really, I didn't.
I believe the thread of light is the guidance rune that he sees, the mutterings of the dancing sprites that take away his fear. If you're wearing church attire, he says,
Tell me, good hunter of the church, have you seen the light? Are my church hunters the honorable Spartans? I hoped they would be.
After Ludwig was pulled into the nightmare, the Radiant Sword Hunters, also called Holy Blades, continued in his footsteps. These hunters and his legacy are one of his primary concerns. Answering yes, he is glad.
Ah, good. That is a relief. To know I did not suffer such denigration for nothing. Thank you kindly. Now I may sleep in peace. Even in this darkest of nights, I see the moonlight.
Answer no, he is sad.
Oh my! Just as I feared. Then a beast-possessed degenerate was I, as my detractors made eminently clear. Does the nightmare never end?
I think this tells us that the hunts Ludwig led were brutal. With guidance from the sprites, he fearlessly plunged into battle. His motives were good, to rid Yarnum of beasts, yet he is worried that his detractors were right, and that he and his hunters would devolve into the beasts they fought. It seems that Ludwig's fears were earned. In his quest to do good, he let the thread of light blind him. He rid himself of fear and lost his humanity. I'm going to let Simon the Herald wrap up this episode as he speaks about the tragic hero Ludwig and what lies ahead in the old hunters.
Oh, he's well and truly gone now. A tragic figure. But he will shame himself no longer. He died with his ideals untarnished. He was a true hero, and earned that much at least. Here, this is Ludwig's guiding light, the blinding thread that led and misled that consummate hero, the poor brute. Do you know why the hunters are drawn to this nightmare? Because it sprouted from their very misdeeds. Things that some would rather keep secret. A pitiful tale of petty arrogance, really. High time someone exposed the whole charade. Now, go on ahead. You seek nightmares and the secrets within, do you not?